we sort of wandered off in a video talking about types of predator, where I sort of said, one of my great heroes, and I have many great heroes, and off I went. And so I didn't mention Erich Fromm. So I'd like to mention Erich Fromm. If you're out there anywhere, Erich, although you are 150 years old now, we hope you're watching. Erich Fromm was a brilliant German psychologist who was driven out by the Nazis and moved to America and wrote some very important books. He gave us the term malignant narcissism, saying, yes, there are people that are kind of selfish and narcissistic and all of that, and look at me, but there are also malignant narcissists. There are people, and this is very useful. But he also came up with a simple way of looking at behaviour, and he said it can be biophilic, life-affirming, or necrophilic, by which he didn't mean what you're thinking. So we're going to talk about it rather than in Greek, we're going to talk about it in English. And people can be generally life-affirming or life-denying. We talk about this elsewhere as saying that to be life-denying is to be antisocial. And that doesn't mean not going to parties. It means being unpleasant towards other people, not considering them to have value. And I think it's a good measure to say, well, is my behaviour life-affirming? Am I being helpful to other people? Or am I saying and doing things that are actually hurtful to other people? Now, a lot of what we've talked about is about predators and how they affect other people's lives.
Yeah.
And predators are antisocial.
Yeah, you spot them through their life-denying behaviour.
Yeah, that they're nasty to you. And they say nasty things about people, and they do horrible things, and they like pulling the wings off flies.
It's always seemed too tricky, quite fiddly, pulling wings off flies.
People do in fact do it. When I was a child at school, I was about 12, and there was a boy in the class, and what he did was he grabbed one wing of the fly and pulled the other one off. And then he watched it. Apparently the cult leader Sun Myung Moon used to like doing this as a child.
Yeah, good one.
And then he could watch it for days as the poor thing struggled around. There are people who are sadistic, there are people who are unpleasant, there are people who are nasty. But there's also a tendency to go that way. There's a kind of groupthink that if you look at this, I often talk about this one because it really touched me. In Ken Burns' huge, long jazz, there's a point where an ageing white critic talks about his childhood in the Deep South, and he says, I grew up being told that blacks were a different species to whites, which is, excuse me smiling, but it's a ridiculous idea. Species barrier is to do with breeding. If you can breed with something, then you're within the species. And a species boundary would be where, for example, a horse and a donkey breed, and they can make the mule.
But the mule can't reproduce.
The mule will be sterile. So I'm sorry, anybody that thinks that black, white, Chinese, whoever people are a different species, we can interbreed. We're the same species. We're variants within that species. But anyway, this jazz critic said that as a kid he'd just grown up in this environment where
it reminds me of my time at school where we were plastered with figures such as Alan Sugar, and we were encouraged to be dominant like these people so we can take a higher place in society by being
bullies.
Yeah, bullies, exactly.
You're fired. And we're allowed to say that you should think about Donald Trump in the same way. Possibly. Who knows? That he ran the same TV show as Alan Sugar in the UK runs The Apprentice. And they're bullying. And I had the same thing at school. It's like I was being told that Jesus was the guy we were meant to be following, and we were meant to be sweet and loving, and we would turn the other cheek 7 and 70 times 7 if anybody attacked us, and then we were being taught to be aggressive and make a lot of money. And I, at age 12 or 13,
really
thought
go together.
Maybe there's something I'm not getting here that's profound, but there wasn't. So where did we bounce off from there? We managed to mention Erich Fromm, and we managed to managed to talk about life denying and life affirming, and then we talked about you at school.
Yeah.
And
life encouraging life denying behaviour socially.
Yeah, that we will remember what we were talking about eventually at some point, possibly. But until that time, there is. I was talking about the jazz critic, wasn't I?
Yes.
It would be good to. Short-term memory. So he said that he'd been taught that blacks were sort of non-people, and so if there's nothing more life-denying than that, is there? Saying they're no good.
Yeah.
And he said one night he went to a club as a young man, and he saw Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, Pops, who was the most influential musician of the 20th century. I think it would be fair to say. The singing style that comes out of jazz came from him. The idea of scat, that came from Pops. But his trumpet playing, there are still now in music academies, there are pieces that he played that are considered to be among the most difficult pieces of trumpet. So this critic said, here I'm a young man, I've been taught that the blacks are inferior, and I'm seeing the only real genius I've ever seen in my life, and he is black. And that transformed his experience. He no longer felt that he was superior in any way. And that sense of elitism or superiority, which is typical of authoritarian groups, is something that we would like you to help other people to get over, and to be life-affirming, to be looking towards. And that doesn't mean letting people push you around, but we'll talk about assertiveness probably in the next video. So it's good to just think about, what am I doing? Is it actually beneficial shouting at people and hitting them? Or is it better to try and explain things to them and get them to act in a reasonable way and lock them up if they don't? I'm John Atack.
I'm Sam Atack.
And thank you so much for your company.